Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk to you this morning about the study of the photolysis of so-called small prebiotic compounds, and I'm going to stress about the interest and the benefit of conducting such experiments not only in the laboratory, as it has been done for many years, but also in low Earth orbit, in automated space capsule or on the International Space Station. You may know that the solar UV photons are one of the main driving force of the chemical evolution in the solar system. So I feel a little bit uncomfortable after the previous talks and reading the abstract of the next talk, because all these colleagues are trying to build complex compounds with elegant chemistry, and I feel like the bad guy because I'm mainly concerned into destroying what they are trying to build, because I'm trying to study the stability of these compounds and how long they can stay in space, in various space environments. So this is the sun, this is how it looks like, you know it, and this is most precisely how it looks like in the UV domain, in the vacuum UV domain between 100 and 200 nanometers, and it's dominated by the Lyman alpha band at 122 nanometers, and then after that there's almost nothing. It's not nothing, but the flux is very low compared to the Lyman alpha flux, and then at 180 nanometers, it's the start of the continuum of the black body of the sun. So to characterize the photolysis rate of a reaction, so you want to photolysis one product, you characterize the kinetics of the photolysis by the rate constant J, and J is a function of the integral of the cross-section, the absorption cross-section of the molecules. And in the mid-UV, you can find a lot of data in the literature, but when you turn to vacuum UV between 100 and 200 nanometers, the data are very sparse in the literature. And so either you are lucky and you find some measurements, or you have to do it by yourself, and it's not very easy, and for each compound you want to study, it may take weeks or months of study. But we start to do that, and here I can show you a recent result we've measured in the previous month in our laboratory, the absorption cross-section of adenine as a function of the wavelength, and it's been measured. So if you take the time to do the study, you can measure it. It's not impossible. You need also to know the flux, the incoming flux as a function of the wavelengths, and for the sun it's also not a problem. There are a lot of data measurements, and here you see again the solar flux, the Lyman alpha band, and here we go up to 300 nanometers, so you see the continuation of the continuum of the solar flux. But there are data you don't know and are extremely difficult to know, such as the photolysis quantum yield. So for each photon which is absorbed, how many are efficient to destroy the molecule? So you don't know this very easily, and you don't know also the limits of the integration up to which wavelength the photolysis will be efficient. So when you don't know some data, for example, the photolysis quantum yield, you do some assumption, and the classical assumption is to do, okay, it's either equal to 1 or it's equal to 0 from one limit to another limit. And from those data, those measurements, you can have estimation of the photolysis rate as a function of the integration limits for which you consider that the quantum yield is 1, but you know it's wrong. And you see that even with those simple assumptions, you can have a large variation of the photolysis rate here from 10 to the minus 4 to roughly 10 to the minus 1, to roughly 3 orders of magnitude. So there are limits to this kind of approach. Another approach in the laboratory is that you just to measure J directly. So you take your sample, you place it under a UV lamp, and you measure the destruction rate, and this photolysis follows the first kinetic order, and when you plot the logarithm of the abundance as a function of time, you get a line. From this line you get the slope, and the slope is directly equal to J, so you can be happy about that. And you don't need the absorption cross-section, you don't need the photolysis quantum yield, and you know the photon flux of your UV lamp. That might be the end of the story, but actually it's not, because this is the spectrum of the sun, and the sun in the laboratory looks like this. And this from one laboratory to another laboratory, depending to the condition you are running your UV lamp, you will get some various emission spectrum. It's quite difficult also to measure it. All the laboratory doesn't have the possibilities to measure this flux. And you see, yes, you have the Lyman alpha here for that kind of lamp, which is an hydrogen lamp. And here you don't have a steady emission. You have a broad emission line here around 160. So it's very difficult to extrapolate what you are measuring in the laboratory, because it's not only a matter of intensity. It will be easy to scale the intensity of your lamp to the intensity of the sun. It's also a matter of the shape of the emission of your lamp compared to the emission of the sun. So we've decided to go to space and make the measurements directly in low Earth orbit. So we have been running three experiments, one in 2007 during 14 days. A Russian capsule called Photon was launched, and outside this capsule was ESA facility called Biopan, and we had samples outside of this space capsule. And we have also been able to go outside of the space station, and this is the ESA Expose module, which is outside of the space station. Here it's a Russian module, actually, and the ESA here. And so you can get your samples and expose them to the sun. So we had 2 experiments in 2007 during 14 days, and during 1 year and a half the experiment process on Expose E, and during 2 years the experiment Amino on Expose R. And then on the space station you get long duration exposition, more than 1,000 up to 2,000 hours of direct solar exposition. So this is how our experimental setup looks like. So we have a lot of cells, and our cells are tiny cells, at the top of which we have magnesium fluoride window, which is transparent to the UV down to 115 nanometers, and at the bottom of this magnesium fluoride window, we make very thin films of organic material, and this organic material is submitted to solar UVs, and the products are degraded during the exposition, and we measure by infrared spectroscopy the difference between what we launch and what we get in the end. So this is the infrared spectrum of glycine. The black line is before for the exposed cell, and the green line is after, and you see the decay. We can measure the decay, and we have dark control. So we have each time 2 layers, one layer which is exposed to the sun, and one layer which is below and doesn't see any UV photons. So we have exposed samples, not exposed samples, ground control samples, and from this we can measure for numerous organic compounds the kinetics constant. For some of them, it's only upper limits because, for example, during 14 days, it's not enough to have to see a degradation. And from this data, you get half time at 1 astronomical unit, and you can extrapolate those data in the interstellar medium if we want. What was our objective was to compare what we obtain in space and what we obtain in the laboratory. So for each compound exposed, we've done the same kind of experiments in the laboratory as if we were not able to do it in space. So we have a series of data. We can measure the decay of the compound as a function of time. And then we compare both sets of data. So at first sight, it's not comparable, but it's obvious. We don't have the same flux. It's not the same lamp. And so the result for space exposition and lab measurements are not the same. So if we want to extrapolate the lab results to space condition, you have to make assumptions, and that's the tricky part of the question. So we've taken the hypotheses which are made classically in the literature, which is, for example, only Lyman alpha matters. So we extrapolate the data stating that only Lyman alpha matters, and this is the ratio between space and lab measurement, and it's more than 100. And we can make other assumptions saying that we take into account up to 200, but why only up to 200? It's an assumption, and then it's better, but it's only dependent on the limits for extrapolation we're stating. So the lab results are extremely difficult to extrapolate to space conditions, and just because it's very difficult, maybe impossible to get the same emission spectrum from a lab simulation to mimic the entire solar spectrum. And if we don't have the VUV absorption spectrum of each molecule, the quantum yield of each molecule at each wavelength, it's almost impossible to get a very precise J value. So, as a conclusion, these experiments there are real benefits of conducting such experiments in space because we don't find the same results than in the laboratory, and the difference may be very important. We can have many samples exposed at the same time to the same conditions. And I've talked only about UV, but it's not only a question of UV in the solar system. There are also cosmic rays, solar winds, and we need to take this also into account. But can we do this better? I would say yes, because for now we only measure a starting condition, and then we get the samples back and we measure the state of the sample after it's returned to Earth. And we need to have precise measurement and then to follow the evolution of the degradation of the sample. And it's possible with the NASA Oreo nanosatellite, which measure in the UV, and we have the project with CNES and hopefully ESA to have a new facility called Vitrine with an infrared spectrometer in situ measuring the evolution of the sample. So I see I'm running out of time, so I will stop there, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Adrien.